I'm doing all right. Thanks.
Wait a minute.
Go for it.
All right, call to order.
Burrows,
Yes.
Laughlin, Moreno,
Yes.
Shield. Yes. Vargas. Yes. We have a quorum.
Can I get a motion to approve the agenda, please?
We'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
And a second.
I'll second it.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. This is the time for community members to make public comments to the board. Please be aware that the board cannot comment on anything that is said during this time. This is the only time on the agenda reserved for open public comment. Please limit comments to 4 minutes. And I don't see anybody in the room or on the phone, so we're gonna go ahead and keep going. Central administration.
No fundraising requests or overnight trips. So next is you, Matt.
All right, well, I'm going to share my screen for just a second. I know you guys have a copy of this packet in front of you too, but you can either look at your packet or look at the screen, whichever you prefer. First of all, good evening. Matt Gillespie from Piper Sandler in Des Moines. And I think you're all aware that we were taking bids this afternoon at 1 o'clock for the sale of sales tax revenue bonds for one of your projects for the 2022 year. So what we see on this first page is the summary of the bids that were received. Up in the heading, we see that the amount we were asking these bidders to bid on was $5,345,000. And what eventually you're actually issuing is that same amount, $5,345,000, although we did restructure the positioning of some of the principal. After we knew what the bids were, we moved some of the principal around to try to make the annual payments a little bit more level. Looking at this page again, there are 4 bids that were received. The low bid from D.A. Davidson and Company in Denver. And we're looking at this blue, gray, whatever this color is, this true interest rate that's in the bottom right-hand corner of each section to determine which one is the winning bid. So that winning bid here, 2.294, compared to the second place bid of 2.308. So very, very close bids, that first and second place bid. And then we also had, of course, the bids from Baird at 2.41 and Stifel Nicholas 2.43. And then what we see in this skinny box is the resizing. So after we, again, knew the winner, knew the bids, we restructured it slightly. And then this is the actual final result that you see in this skinny box. So not too terribly different than the way it was bid. If we go to the second page, I know this might be a little bit difficult to see on your screen, but if you have the copy in front of you, this is kind of a summary of the next 3 pages. The next 3 pages are showing you the same information in different formats, but this has really kind of got it all in one place. So first of all, up in this orange skinny box at the top of this table, you see this is showing that the purchaser is D.A. Davidson and Company, and the debt service reserve, there is none. There was no reserve fund required, and you did not want to set one aside. So that was positive. That's like kind of like a safety net or a safe deposit box amount that you just take off the top, and it's about 10%. So in this case, you would have set aside around $530,000 in this fund that you could not touch. It's only there available in case you ever had a problem making the payment, which doesn't seem likely for your district to have. And then you'd get the money back, but you wouldn't get it back until out in 2035. So you chose not to set that aside, and it certainly appears that it did not hurt the financing. And the call date is this July 1 of 2030, which is where you see this red dashed line going across the middle of the page. So it's on that date, July 1 of 2030, or anytime after that, that you could begin to pay off the bonds early if you had extra funds to do so. You could also refinance the bonds if it's mathematically feasible to do that at the time. Or of course, you could just leave them outstanding and continue to pay them. In this far right column of the table, you see numbers that are around 1.6 and then around just short of 2.10. That's showing us the coverage. So the amount of revenue that you have from sales tax versus the total amount of principal and interest payment. So in these first few years, when you have the existing bonds that you issued a few years ago are still outstanding, you have about 1.6 times the amount of money you need to make the payment. And then after those bonds are paid off and it's just today's bond that remains, then you have close to 2.1 times the amount of revenue needed to make the payment. So that tells us that, of course, the bonds are quite secure, but also that helps us understand that in the future, if the district needed to borrow more money for some reason, you could, because you could take these numbers down to 1.35 before you'd hit what would be the limit based on the terms that you established today with this D.A. Davidson and Company's bid. Over in the left side boxes, you can see the cost of issuance at the bottom. And then in the middle box where this yellow highlighted amount is, you see the principal amount that you're issuing, $5,345,000. But then you also see in highlighted original issue premium. So I'll try to explain that when we get to a different page, but that's basically cash payment that you're receiving from the bidder up front, $355,000. So that's helping you actually fund the project, and in this case, a little bit more than what you expected. So then moving up to this top box, we see again the cost of issuance just repeated there. The underwriter's cost, that's what D.A. Davidson assessed for their cost, $47,977. That's about half of what I would have expected them to charge. So that was a positive as well, less fees overall. And then what is netting out? So maybe the most important number to you as board members, $5,578,000. That's the amount of money you actually have to spend from this bond financing. So that could be to pay architect's fees, construction costs, land acquisition, whatever you need to spend money on for the project. We originally had that as targeted at 5.2 million, which in the big picture is still your target. But if this premium produced a little bit more money, and instead of reducing the amount of principal that you issued, which could have been done, your administration decided, and I agree with them wholeheartedly, to just keep that as surplus, so that when you take the bids, they actually come in a little bit higher, which is, as you probably are aware, that has been happening pretty regularly. You have at least that extra money to fund that cost. And if the project bids come in where you originally thought they would, or even lower, that still is a very good thing. You just have some extra money that you could fund some other projects that you might have, so long as they fit within the definition of what you held the hearing for. And usually the hearing describes what you're doing, but then also there's a little bit of and other things that's sort of put in there to be vague, so that if you do have extra money, you could fund that. So total 5.578 million to spend. This again here is just another version of that sources and uses, the things that you saw on the left side of the page. And again, this is where we see the 5.578 million. Now on your copy, you have some handwritten notes, and it's just sort of stressing that that amount is the limit that you have to spend. So of course, if your project bids come in at 5.6 or 5.7 million, that'll be the board's prerogative whether you choose to accept that high bid or not. But you certainly could accept such a high bid and just fund the difference with sales tax or PEPAL if you want to accept the bid at a higher cost. And depending on how high that cost might be, it's probably still to your benefit to accept it rather than reject it, and take your guesses at what might happen 2 or 3 months later in this current kind of unusual environment. The page after that, just a clean version of the debt service schedule, so without all of the other details. And again, the copy you have printed has the line that goes under the July 1 of 2030. So that is the call date of the bonds, remember. So if you had extra funds, you could pay them off, and you could pay them off in $5,000 increments. It doesn't have to be that you pay the entire thing off all at once. So you could pay small increments if that's what you wanted to do. And then this page that you see up on the screen, if you look at the version you have printed, again, there are some handwritten notes there. So I'll try to explain where this premium comes from. And as I told Abby earlier, you don't have to understand this. It's a little bit above most of your sort of pay grade, so to speak. But when somebody pays you $300,000 extra, it sort of creates questions, I think. So I want to try to explain it to you. This is, first of all, very typical. Pretty much every bond issuance over the last close to 10 years has been structured like this because interest rates have been so low, and they are still very low. They have begun to rise. These rates are higher than what we would have expected 3 months ago or 2 months ago, for example, but they're still extremely low. And because they're so low, these bidders, the investors, whoever's buying the bonds, they don't want to have, for example, I'll use the first year's maturity as the example. So on your copies that you have, there's a big box around the rate, the yield, and the price. So the rate, that's the same thing as the coupon, we call it, or the interest rate. That's what the district is actually going to pay. So in this worksheet, you see 3% for all of the maturities, but that's not what the investor is earning because they're paying you a premium up front. And we look at this price column, and in this first maturity, you move the decimal place over 1. So they're paying you $1,022.69, but you're only going to pay them back $1,000 when that bond matures. That's the face value of each bond. So that extra $22.69 per $1,000 bond for this 2023 maturity, multiplied times the 50 bonds, that's generating a $1,134 premium. And then each year, there is also other premiums that are totaling that $355,000 number. So they're sort of in effect paying you cash up front to entice you to pay them 3%, because 3% is above what the yield is, and they don't want, for example, it to be a 1.2% rate or coupon because they think interest rates are going to continue to rise, which I think that's probably true. So if they had a 1.2% rate and they paid you 100%, or they paid you $1,000 now and then you're going to pay them $1,000 later, then that 1.2%, as soon as interest rates rise, which could be tomorrow, could be the next day, it could be 3 weeks from now, they're technically underwater. They're losing money on the bond. But if they can keep the interest rate above the yield, at least on paper, it appears that they're not losing that money. So there are other reasons why these investors choose to structure it this way. And I'll be honest, I don't even understand all of the reasons. There are tax reasons that some of them do it. Many of the purchasers are institutions, and many of the purchasers are very affluent people, which I am not. So I don't get to talk to my tax advisor about those types of things. But if that makes any sense to you at all, and again, it doesn't have to make sense, but it's producing this very large premium. In effect, you're going to pay that $355,000 back by paying them 3% over this time. But it's nice because you get the money up front today, which helps you build a building or meet the cost of the structure, the project, etc. Now, on this page where the line goes across the middle on the copies you have in front of you, that's not the call date in this example. That's just where the interest rates that Fort Madison School District, they didn't have any bond principal coming due prior to 2028, but Fort Madison was selling the same kind of bond issue today at 11 o'clock. So just 2 hours before you. They also had the same A+ rating, but their purchaser decided to use insurance, which yours did not, and that's a good thing. So they actually got to use a AA rating of the insurance company, but they had to pay a fee to do that. And at Fort Madison, they also funded a reserve fund. So their issue was $10 million. So they had to set aside basically about $1 million out of that in this kind of lockbox reserve fund, which you did not have to do. But you can see there, those are the yields that are in there in my handwriting. So that first maturity in 2029, where Fort Madison had 1.9%, you had 1.95, and we would have expected your bonds to be slightly higher in rate or yield because your bond rating was lower than theirs, since they had the AA insured rating and they were setting aside a reserve fund. But in fact, if you look through those years, you see that for several of them, you actually had a lower interest rate than they did. And even in the end, those at the 2035 maturity, where you have a 2.25% yield, they had 2.17. So they did have a lower yield there, but it wasn't significantly lower, not as significant as we would have expected with the difference in the bond rating and the fact that they set aside the reserve fund. So that tells me that West Liberty today probably got a slightly better deal than Fort Madison. It's hard to see that in all of these worksheets because you don't see everything that was involved with Fort Madison. But in the bigger scheme of things, because of the insurance cost to them and the reserve fund having to set that aside, they probably, or you, excuse me, probably had a slightly better result than they did overall. Going to the next page, we see information that is not specific to this bond issuance. This is more generic in nature, but we see up at the top, there's two lines that say, have some description of your revenue purpose statement. So the district voted back in September of 2013. At that time, you were approving the revenue purpose statement that would have extended through 2029 when the sales tax was going to expire before the legislature extended it, which they did in the summer of 2019. And then, of course, you just held another revenue purpose statement extension election last March. And that election gives the board the authority to continue to spend sales tax through the current expiration of that tax, which is January 1st of 2051. So that's what opens up your ability to borrow for these longer periods of time. This big box that's in the top left-hand part of the page, this is showing you your certified enrollment from 2001 to 2021. And over that random period of time, there's nothing important about those particular years. I just have easy access to the data. But you've actually gained 2.8 students on average, certified students, although obviously you're quite aware over the last 4 or 5 years, you've had a fairly significant loss in certified students. And it's the certified students upon which your sales tax is distributed to you. So they're very valuable from a sales tax point of view. So in this middle table, this is assuming that you can see in this gold box, we assume that you do not gain or lose any certified students moving forward, which of course you will. You'll gain some, you'll lose some. If you think that you're going to have major losses or major increases, you'd want to tell me about that and we could update this for your future reference. But at least for tonight's reference, we just assumed flat enrollment, but your revenue per student, which is a statewide figure, growing from this year's approximate $1,116 to maybe $1,130 next year, and then slowly ticking upwards to maybe $1,600 per student out in 2051. So your total revenue, even if you do lose some students still, is probably likely to hold steady or still grow. And that's what we've seen happen across the state, even in districts that do have declining enrollment, because the sales tax itself typically grows at a faster pace than what enrollment is declining. And then the rest of this worksheet, this is just an annualized version of the rest of the pages. So most of these pages look like this. This is just one very long cash flow that goes month by month between now and 2051. And it's showing your current cash balance as of January. So this is sales tax and PEPAL combined. So think of it like a checkbook register. It's just adding that money together, 5.9 million. And then along the left side of the page, we're bringing in revenue from sales tax. We're bringing in revenue from voted PEPAL and board PEPAL. And then we begin to make payments on the 2020 bonds, those bonds you refinanced last year, or issued last year, excuse me, and today's bonds, the 2022 bonds. And then we also have factored in here the assumption of the PEPAL notes, which you may issue later this summer. We've already factored that in. So if something changes, either the size of that borrowing, or if the borrowing doesn't happen at all for some reason, we would eventually will adjust those payment amounts there. And then in this middle section, you see expenditures. So this is money going out from sales tax and or PEPAL to fund school bus purchases, leases, technology, general maintenance, 150,000 each and every year, plus inflation for just general maintenance. So that's tuck pointing and carpeting, painting, side work repair, etc. The software and technology leases, about $128,000 a year on that stuff. Buying it one bus every year. So a new bus every single year, which may or may not really happen, but it's built in this way. And then over in the far right column, kind of like your checkbook register at home, it's just taking into account all of those additions and subtractions and netting it all out. And there you see that your cash balance is likely to continue to grow, even though you're making these payments on today's bonds, but still grow to fairly significant levels. And when you go to the next page, the page after that, the page after that, you can see that, those balances grow to very large levels. Now, that doesn't mean that you're actually going to have those large cash balances, because this worksheet does factor in the routine, recurring type of expenditures that you have from sales tax and PEPAL, but it doesn't factor in the large, very expensive things that are not as routine, like repairing roofs, replacing boilers, those types of very expensive things that the district will certainly have to do from time to time. Those are not reflected here. So as and if you do those types of things, it's going to draw these balances to some lower levels. If you go to the second to last page of the packet, this is where that cash flow ends out in 2051. And what you see if you look along the bottom, just the totals of all those things, even after you have collected your sales tax, your voted PEPAL, your board PEPAL, you've made payments on today's bonds, the hypothetical PEPAL notes that you may issue later this year, the sales tax bonds that you already issued 2 years ago. You spend $5 million on buses, you spend $5.4 million on technology, and $6 million on other repairs. Now, this is over 30 years, so it's quite a long period of time, but all of that is already assumed. And then in the far right column, you see you may have an additional $35 million over the next 30 years that you could spend on other needs. Completely new school buildings, perhaps. It could be repairs to buildings, additions to buildings, additional buses, more technology than you expected, et cetera, et cetera. So there's quite a bit of cash here. From an infrastructure point of view, the district is sitting quite well. So that's good. You can definitely count on keeping your facilities updated, modern, and improved. And then the very last page is just simply the timeline, which you've already been through most of it. You held your hearing back in January, did the waiting period. Today, February 22nd, we're taking bids, and then we presume here in a few minutes you're going to award the bid. At your meeting in March, on March 7th, you'll pass some more resolutions, very typical, the same types of resolutions that you pass for every type of bond issuance. Those will all come to you pre-populated from your attorney, so it'll be pretty easy and it won't take you very much time to get through those. And then on March 22nd, that's when the transaction will close and the bulk of the bond money is going to be wired into your local bank at that time. Today, you did receive $53,450. That's called the good faith deposit, and it's very much like earnest money when you buy a home. And that's 1% of the amount you were asking people to bid on. So the winning bidder had until 3 o'clock this afternoon to get that wire sent out. I haven't actually asked Abby if the money came in, but I did see the wire numbers. So I'm confident that those funds are coming to the bank. But like I said, the rest of the money will come to you on March 22nd. So I'll stop talking for a second and see if there are any questions that the board has about any of these worksheets or the process in general. And if not, once we're done answering questions, we're going to go right to the resolution. But first, I want to see if you have any questions.
So in terms of the rate, as we approve, assuming that we approve tonight, right now, everything's locked in. It is as it is, not a paperwork delay or anything, because as you indicated, days, weeks, months can make a big difference on that. So
yes, that is correct. This is a guaranteed. It's locked in as long as you approve the paperwork tonight, and as long as you approve the paperwork in March. The bidder cannot back out of it unless the district did something illegal, which of course you're not going to do. So yeah, it's locked in. The interest rates will not change for the entire term of the bonds unless you choose to refinance them. But otherwise, everything you see here, these payments are going to be exactly like you see them to the penny every single year, just as you see it here.
I was wondering, is the A+ rating, is that unique for school districts or?
No, that's a pretty typical rating here in Iowa. The ratings would go AAA, and there is no school district in Iowa that could get a AAA. The state of Iowa is AAA rated. And then it would go to AA+, and then AA, and then AA-. Those are all above the rating you got. And then A+ would be the next rating. So here in Iowa, whether we're talking about sales tax bonds or general obligation bonds, most Iowa school districts would get an A+ or an A rating. There are a few, mostly metro, but not all metro. There are a few, maybe 15 districts or so that could get to that next highest level, which would be the AA-, the AA-. And then likewise, there are a few that would drop lower into the A-. And unfortunately, there's one or two from time to time that even drop into the BBB. But those are districts that have significant general fund budgeting problems. Basically, the school boards in those districts have failed to do their job and ultimately increase property taxes when it was necessary. And so therefore they dropped into that low rating level. But the A+ is really exactly what we would expect to get. Of course, in my own personal opinion, I think you should be AAA rated, because we know that no school, city, or county in Iowa has ever defaulted on a general obligation bond, ever in the whole history of the state. And with these sales tax bonds, they haven't been around that long, but they've been around for a little over 20 years. And no school district has ever defaulted on these bonds either. So even though you may be small, or a district may be rural, or, rich or poor, it doesn't matter. The way that the financing comes from the state, the mechanism of the sales tax, that is unique, and it's a very positive thing. And so I personally think that all of the schools in Iowa should be getting higher ratings. But this is the formula that Standard & Poor's and Moody's both have adopted. So you'd get the same rating for most districts around the state.
Any other questions for Matt? All right, thank you,
Okay.
Matt.
Yep, I'm actually going to lead you guys through the resolution just to make it
Yeah.
easy. So I'm going to paraphrase the resolution, and that is acceptable for me to do. We just need one of the board members to so move what I say and another board member to second the motion. And then Abby, you do have to have a roll call vote for the bond. So the motion before you is directing the sale of $5,345,000 of school infrastructure sales services and use tax revenue bonds, series 2022, to D.A. Davidson and Company of Denver, Colorado.
I'll move.
In a second.
I'll second that.
Okay. And then a roll call vote.
Burrows.
Yes.
Laughlin, that's here. Moreno.
Yes.
Shield. Yes. Vargas. Yes.
Okay, that is all you needed to do for tonight for this action. You can continue on with your board agenda. Congratulations to you. If you guys have any kind of questions looking forward as you come back and study this, which I'm sure you all will do tonight by your bedside. But if you or community members have questions, direct those to Abby. She probably will know the answer, but if not, she can always get a hold of me wherever I might be around the state and answer your questions or your citizens' questions. So congratulations, thank you, and it was good seeing you guys today, Sean and Abby. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay, so the next item is the Muscatine County Extension Agreement for 22-23. This is one that you had.
Yeah, I would move that we table this for now until our next meeting.
Okay. Can I get a second for tabling the item 4D?
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor of tabling it?
Aye.
Aye.
We will table that to the next meeting and put it on the agenda there. Next item then is a change order, Abby.
Yeah, so this is actually the same change order that was, the board approved at the last meeting. Our architect was having issues with the system and he forgot to include the markup and bond issuance or bond costs in those amounts. So really, we're just adding another, I think, $400 to the last change order, all the same stuff, but just for formalities, we're approving that, so we have the right amount.
I move acceptance of this change order.
And a second.
Second that.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. And then architect contract. This is for the athletic complex, and there's a recommendation to approve the contract with Tyler at FEH Design for the athletic complex. And this is going to come from a couple of funds. Sean, Abby, did you guys have any more commentary on that? I don't know.
No, I mean, we've used Tyler for the last two projects, I believe. Like, the district has been pretty happy with FPH design and their work and Tyler's commitment to the district. He's been very practical, realistic with his just advice and the way he's handled the general contractors and just the progress. And yeah, we'd like to continue moving forward with him. We'll have him for WLC as well. And so it'd be nice to use him as an addition for the athletic complex, since he'll be out here already for the LC and we're pleased with his work and commitment to the districts.
Perfect. Any more questions about this? Otherwise, I'll take a motion
I'll take a motion to approve.
and a second.
I'll second it.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries for the approval of the contract with FEH Design for the athletic complex.
This next thing, budget guarantee, recommendation to approve this resolution on an annual basis, even in the years that we don't need it, which is looking that way right now. The SSA has been set at 2.5%, an additional amount to state per pupil of $5, which results in the district not needing a budget guarantee, but it's just something we like to do annually, just so we keep in practice when we do need that. And if something would change in the legislature, you never know until they're finally done for the year. Then we just have it out there. The guarantee resolution doesn't state an amount of our budget guarantee. It's more just like if for some reason SSA would actually go to zero, and they would pass that at the very end, we would still be okay. It basically promises 101% of your prior year's enrollment, no less than that. So because we only dropped 3 students, we shouldn't need it, but it's just kind of a thing that we recommend to do each year.
Okay, and then nobody's got questions, then the motion is right there at the bottom of that 3-paragraph deal. The part where it says suggested motion.
Okay.
If somebody
Yeah.
read that.
Go ahead.
Sorry,
Resolved
formality.
with the Board of Directors of the West Liberty Community School District will levy property tax for fiscal year 2022 through 2023 for the regular program budget adjustment as allowed under section 257.14 Code of Iowa.
And a second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Now the ratification of the agreement with WLEA. Abby, do we need to pull that up? Do we not need to pull it? I think everybody's kind of, we've seen it and we're talking about. Yeah, it was in the packet anyway, so, but, so this will be us. We sat down with them, gosh, I can't remember now, about a week and a half ago now, and discussed with the WLEA about, there we go. The increase in the generator wages, that's what I'm looking for. So to the base of the wage scale there for the teachers. And this year we've agreed upon increasing it by $1,000 to the base, which is more than we have in most years past. It's actually about 5.6%, I believe, 5.8% to the salaries in terms of an increase. So trying to be competitive, trying to draw in teachers, trying to retain teachers, trying to reward them for their efforts and the hard work that they do put in. It's a thankless job, right? So try to at least do what we can to help out. So
English not informed, but can I say something?
yeah,
Okay.
as long as it's positive.
Yes, it is. So I missed 2 minutes at the beginning when you guys opened, but on behalf of the WLEA, we just want to say thank you. I know Dan sent you all an email, but just echoing those sentiments that we appreciate the relationship between the board and the superintendent and Abby and the work that we did this year, and that it was smooth, and that the teachers have also come back and said that they really appreciate the recognition and the support. So
Yeah, but I'm glad that we could come to a good agreement. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, with that being said, we need to ratify it. So I need a motion to approve the agreement.
I'll make a motion to approve.
And a second.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Good job.
Motion carries. And then we've got second reading of board policies 300 to 314.3. Off the top of my head, I don't remember that one. But I remember, I know we went through it, but without listening, I don't remember which one it was, but we will need a motion to approve that if there's no suggestions.
I just have a question, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm asking. There's a lot of reference in here to this Iowa Standards for School Leaders that was adopted November 18, 2020, effective July 1st, 2021. Can you explain why that was created? And I'm curious because it's
Whistle standards. I can give you a very brief synopsis of that. So they have the old standards that administrators have used for many years. I think just in a nutshell, the purpose of these new standards was to kind of change the way that administrators were evaluated, and rather than make it more of a review of the standards and I don't want to say punitive, but just more, met, didn't meet, and just to make it more of an ongoing process of reviewing standards, targeting certain standards, working on those certain standards for growth. So I guess it's more of a growth model is what they kind of in a nutshell, what they're looking to gain from this. If you look through all 10 standards and the components of those, it would be, pretty tough to master every one of those year in and year out. So I think the purpose is, review the standards, know the standards, reflect upon the standards, but then also, for professional growth, then targeting, a couple of key areas that might be aligned with, board district goals, et cetera. Then really focusing on those throughout the year.
so they'll be used like in evaluating you and the other administrative goals
Correct.
in the district.
Yep.
That's part of the evaluation process. Got it.
It seemed like it was a lot of just clarifying generalizations that were in there, when I was reading through it, that's what it looked like to me, but, and aligning with, expectation from the state and how other districts are writing this policy.
Standardize it.
Yeah, yeah.
So sign everything, yeah.
Any other questions, comments?
I guess I'll move for the adoption of second reading of this.
And a second,
I'll second that.
all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so then that moves us to the second reading of board policy 802.5 R1 and 802.5 R2.
So yeah, that was basically to remove that number 8 on 802.5 R1, add this 802.5 R2 with what others gave us to, it's related to disclosures with all the bond stuff. Super interesting.
All right, I'll take a motion to approve the policies.
Make a motion to approve the balances.
And a second,
I'll second.
and all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Consent agenda.
Yes, everything was included in the board packet, minutes from the last two board meetings, warrants, treasurer's report. One retirement, Brenda Miller, middle school music choir teacher. And then one new hire. Any questions on that?
I'll make a motion to accept the items from the board packet.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. So future agenda items, we've got the next meeting, March 7th, at 6 p.m. It's back on Monday. again. We'll have a superintendent report, FY21 audit review, concurrent enrollment courses, student on-track update, superintendent evaluation, and then the moved item from central administration today, which was the Muscatine County extension agreement for 22-23 school year. As always, if you think of something or you're interested in hearing about something some more, just let us know. We'll get it added.
So the superintendent report will be first, like you'll do an overview of the year and then we do the evaluation or we start the evaluation.
The report will be the normal report, just an update. And then evaluation, I guess, probably go to what closed session. and then-
Yeah.
But isn't there
The
a
stuff from
packet then?
the stuff from the report won't necessarily be correlated with the review. We'll have a packet, Abby, right, that comes out like next week or so. I guess we could do it now, really, but it's just a standardized.
It's a nice
form
first
to fill
term,
out.
so. we-
Yeah, no, we'll walk you through it. But it won't be that you have to determine your evaluation of the superintendent during that day.
Yeah, that's what I
You'll
mean.
have
So
time to
this
think
is just
through it.
going to be like the start of it, and then when do we have to have the full evaluation done?
I don't remember the timeline, but I'll find out for sure.
Yeah, Emily's handled it in the past.
I know,
so,
yeah. I was just trying to remember, but actually, yeah, so I think that the paperwork is, I mean, it's really straightforward how it goes. You get a document, I think we had like a week last time to go through it and, fill out what our thoughts were. And then we came into session and basically discussed
Discussed it.
our notes and said, this
An
is what we
agreement,
think, and,
yeah.
then we can kind of come to a conclusion of this is where Sean Paul, I guess, in that vein.
In this policy packet, they had kind of an explanation or
Right.
and there's like a self-evaluation. Is that the
There will be that in
report? or-
no, so the superintendent report that's listed here is just the normal report
Okay,
out,
got
updating on the district.
So self-evaluation.
Self-evaluation
then we do
will be
our
separate.
Individual, then we come together and it's closed session.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so
And
we'll have,
that's next meeting.
yeah, you'll have plenty of time to reflect and think through your evaluation. It won't be one of those things where we come into closed session. You have 10 minutes to write it down and figure it out on the spot. You'll have time to really think through and then discuss. If that makes sense.
Last time we got the information a couple of days prior to, and then when we came together, it was more like we all kind
Yeah.
of we've discussed it as a group and finalized it.
Yeah, and I don't see any reason that there was nothing in the document, in the evaluation document that is time sensitive in the sense where we would need to do it really close to the meeting time. I mean,
Yeah.
we could get it out sooner than later, and that'd be okay.
So like a 10-pager or something.
No, it's pretty concise. It's pretty concise. I mean,
It's a tough one.
It circles around the expectations from the state, from the board,
Yeah.
mission statement, all that kind of thing, make sure, I mean, everything that Sean already knows to be evaluated on, there's no surprises, nothing special.
And would you share also with kind of your development? There was some documents you shared with us a while ago.
Individual professional development. plan.
Yeah, it's between that and then the entry plan, that, the startup action plan kind of thing. We can look at that as a whole, as a board, and say, okay, Sean said he was gonna come in and do this stuff, did he, or didn't he? And then what do we think about that? Were there extenuating circumstances or stuff like that?
Paper, rock, scissors kind of thing.
Yeah.
And with the new missile standards, I can send you that packet. There's one specific for superintendents as well. That has some valuation tools in there, so you can kind of pick and choose or look at those.
Yeah,
In
perfect.
addition,
Yeah, if you could send that out to us, that'd be good.
do that.
All right. Anything else? All right, with that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
And a second,
I will second.
all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Adjourn at 6:44.
Good job.